We are live. We are live here, joined with our good friend, Reece Atwood, over at Otter Creek. In Nebraska, we would call it Otter Creek. But Chris, happy to have you on. My name is Reece Barnes, host of Builders, Budgets, and Beers with my co-host, Dr. Dollar, Matt Calvano. Chris, go ahead and give us a little intro on yourself, Otter Creek, how you got into the business, where you guys are, just some of the basics.
Yeah, we call it Otter Creek here too in New Hampshire, actually, Reece.
But
thank you. Thank you guys for having me on. Excited to chat with you. So yes, my wife and I are co-owners of Otter Creek Homes. We are a design build firm here in the seacoast area of New Hampshire, all 13 miles of coastline. We do exclusively residential. We do a mix of remodel and new construction. So I'd say maybe 75% remodel, 25% new construction. Got a team of 12 people here, so on the smaller side, but we kind of go start to finish with the, I guess, higher end design build model.
Love it. And I'm really excited for the episode, Chris, because I feel like we met at JLC up in Rhode Island. And you had heard about us from, some of our other customers and other people that you listen to from a podcasting and a building standpoint up in New England. And I'm really interested to hear your take mainly on the topic for today's show, which is why builders tend to struggle with the business side of their construction company. So we're going to be hitting on that. But first, going to Builders, Budgets, and Beers, we have to have some beers. And we went ahead. Chris, do you have your beer on you? Do you have a beer?
Just got it.
He's got a beer. What did you go with? I went with the Stone Face at your recommendation. Do you have a Stone Face as well?
I did get a Stone Face. Admittedly, I kind of forgot about it. And so I just asked my project coordinator, I was like, hey, can you run out of the store and grab me a beer? And he came back with this pounder. So I got to go easy on this thing because I got to drive home after this.
So how do you job cost your project coordinator's time from going to pick up beer as opposed to like running material?
That goes under general labor.
That's right, general labor. Perfect. All right. Well, I'm sitting here with the old Stone Face full clip. What do you have on your end?
I got the classic IPA. Where am I going with this?
Just the classic IPA. You're at a 7. Oh, geez, you got the big dog. I only got the 6.5%.
Yeah.
I mean, I do have.
That's what I said.
Working today.
And it's a tall boy too. It's like I don't even know, 3.2 ounces. This is a king size.
I appreciate. You called it a pounder, which I can appreciate. That's what we used to call 16 ounces in Nebraska too.
But it's actually more than a pounder. It's a pounder plus.
A pounder plus. A pound and change.
That's pretty good.
That was a crisp open on our end. Matt's over here drinking LaCroix. CEO of the company. He's got to keep a straight face. He's got to be clear. All
this
that.
Is pure, this is the pure flavor. The original.
It's not even flavored.
What is it? In New York, they call it, what is it? It's bubbling and still? No, not bubbling. What do they call it? What do they call it? You sit down in a restaurant.
In New York, they always ask you, would you rather have sparkling or still?
Sparkling.
You're a fool if you say either of those. You have to say tap water, because otherwise you're getting charged for water.
$8 for a jug of water.
Tap is fine.
Here we go. This is the old Stone Face. I'm going to give it a swig and then we'll jump into content here. It's got a nice hoppy scent to it. I really like what's going on here. I feel like that's the face I'm just defaulting to after taking a drink of beer. This is good. This is a very casual beer. This is a summer beer. This is one that you throw in the backpack. Get ready to go. I'm in Seacoast. You're probably going to beaches and stuff up there. In Denver, this is a park beer, right? This is something you go down, you send, 3-4 of these, have yourself a little bit of an afternoon. Very crisp. I'm going to go ahead and throw this one in at a 6.8.
6.8, that's a bad review, Reece.
It's not a bad review. It's a very middle of the road review. And I say that because it is a very standard IPA is what I would call it. This isn't like something, crazy with a bunch of like weird, wild notes to it and more citrus or whatever. This is just your classic run-of-the-mill IPA, a very easy drinker. I would throw these in the backpack on the way to the park for sure.
Yeah, you delivered that. You delivered that with the Stone Face, Reece. You delivered that with the Stone Face. That review.
Stone Cold Reece Barnes. Here we go.
To be fair, I gave you a different recommendation, but I don't think you could get it out there from Maine. So I'll throw a quick shout out to my friends at Tributary and Kittery, but Stoneface is good too. It was kind of my conservative, like, I know you can get your hands on this. So
Yeah.
the review kind of matches the recommendation. So.
Yeah, the liquor mart that I picked this up from, so we had to do some coordinating on our end. We had to call ahead and they had to like get it ordered and delivered. But he was smiling because he was like, I love Stoneface. And whenever we have it, it gets sold out of immediately. And this is in Denver. So
Nice.
Shout out to Stoneface for having a beer that is known all across the country and for good reason. Again, not to be, to Matt's point, low scoring. This is a beer that you could walk into in a liquor mart, grab off the shelf, give New England a little love, and know exactly what you're getting into. A very good, very standard IPA.
I'm just glad you didn't say 7. Sometimes when we bring in potential candidates to hire and we have some of the employees sit in and I'll be like, give me a score of 1 to 10. And I say, you can't give them a 7 because a 7 is such a default, like you can't get in trouble for giving a 7. 8 is a pretty high mark. And 6 is like, oh, okay, let's talk about this. You gave it a 6.
Yeah, I love it, which is actually a good segue into recruiting, which again, we'll focus on more the financial side here. But again, with the topic of why builders tend to struggle with more of the business side of running a construction business. And I want to start the episode with adding some context to that because I don't want our listeners to be sitting here saying like, I don't know how to run a business, because they're very good at putting up the product, right? They're very good. I was actually getting drinks with a builder here in Denver just last night, and he's built a very premium business on true craftsmanship. And that's what he chalks it up to, is having been in the industry for so long and understanding what good work looks like and holding subs and their team to a level of accountability that allows them to sell the premium work. But the reason I want to talk to you about this, Chris, is because as we've been building our relationship, you have, in my opinion, some really good perspective on what builders do well, what they don't do well, specifically around the business side. And let's just start with, in terms of having a strong business side in a construction company, what does that actually include? What does that mean? Where do you see builders actually struggling from a business standpoint running their construction companies?
It's a good question. I think I think if you take this back and try to look at the root of it all, our industry is mostly made up of what I would call micro businesses. And definitionally, I don't know exactly how many employees that means or how many people, but they're really small businesses. And for the most part, a lot of the businesses, especially in our market, are people who used to be the owner operator, bags on, working in the field, decided to scale their business for one reason or another to make a little bit more money because they wanted to take on more projects. And they decided that they needed to kind of step out of the field. And so I think a lot of the people that are running the business, right, typically the owner, they didn't come up through their kind of trajectory to be a CEO or to be a CFO or just the owner of the business. They came up as a builder. They came up building homes and working in the field. And to your point, they're really good at that. And I think a lot of it comes back to the fact that most people start in the field in this industry and they work their way out of the field. And it's actually something on the flip side of this, and I won't go down this rabbit hole, but I think it's something that frustrates me that in our industry, it is like kind of widely accepted that the goal is to get out of the field, right? To like move into management, to move into the office. And I actually think a lot of times there's kind of a principle around that where you keep moving people up and keep promoting them to next positions because they do well. So you move them to the next position and the next position until you get to a spot where they don't do well and then they stay there. And if you do that with everybody, you end up with everyone in positions that they're really not that good at. And not to derail us, but I think there are so many guys in this industry that are really good in the field. They'd be really good as site supers. It requires a really different skill set, I think, to run the business. And I'm not sure that we actually need to be looking within kind of like the people in the field to find the next people to be running projects and running businesses. I think we can look at other industries and bring people toward our industry that maybe have different backgrounds, that have backgrounds in operations and backgrounds in logistics and things that would be applicable to construction.
Totally. Well, and I think that's a great point to make in terms of like with books like The E-Myth, right? And all this business content that's getting out there. It's a very widely understood concept, especially in small business, of I need to work on the business, not in the business. And I actually have a buddy of mine that's running a roofing company, and he's in this conversation currently of, he's scaled it up to revenues past where he came on board. So that's great. They're growing the top line, but now he's getting to the point where he needs to start operationalizing it. And he's makes the comment of like, it's really difficult to remove yourself from the day to day so that then you can start focusing on it more from like an executive or a leadership or a business owner perspective. What would you say from your experience is probably one of the easiest or lowest hanging fruit practices that a listener could do to start removing themselves from the day to day, getting the bags off and starting to get more business time?
Low hanging fruit, simple, not necessarily easy. Sit down and start putting some numbers on paper.
Okay.
I think our industry is obsessed with production and being busy and getting work done and doing tangible, right? All of us are in this industry because we like the feeling of getting tangible work accomplished and seeing a wall framed at the end of the day, seeing a house wired at the end of the day. Putting numbers on a piece of paper that may end up in a folder that you never see again doesn't feel tangible. But I think we're too busy being busy, right? And like working in the field to sit down and put some numbers on paper and just start kicking it around. Because you have to start somewhere. You got to start with at least an idea of how much work do we do in a week? How much work can we perform in a month? What can we accomplish in a year? How many jobs did we do last year? What was our revenue? What's my payroll? Just getting some of those numbers down on paper or in a spreadsheet and start to familiarize yourself with what the numbers of your business look like.
So start with the numbers, and then, okay, so from that standpoint, it's understanding your business from a data standpoint, getting the numbers on paper. But then what do you do with that information once you have it? What are you looking for? How do you apply it? Go ahead.
Well, I think another challenge that we face in our industry is a lack of a formal education process. I think there's a lack of a formal education process in the field. We don't, if you're for electricians, and I guess when I speak about the industry, I'm talking about guys that call themselves carpenters that eventually call themselves builders, right? They would align with the carpentry trade versus a mechanical trade or something else. If you're an electrician, like you go to some schooling, you go through kind of a coursework. It's regimented, it's structured. For carpenters, it's like, hey, come work with us and we'll teach you. And you're at the mercy of who you get wrapped in with, and if they're actually good at what they do, or you're just learning shit for a few years. And B, just because they're a good carpenter does not make them a good teacher. So can they teach you effectively? And then on the business side of it, I think is the same thing. I took a little bit different path. I grew up in this industry. My dad was a builder. My uncle and grandfather were builders. My uncle still runs a building company. I worked for my dad before I went out on my own. So I kind of saw the old school approach to it. I learned a lot of what to do to build a house. Admittedly, I learned a lot of what not to do running a business.
Right.
And so, but I also went to college. I went to school. I got an economics degree. I thought I was going to work in finance or something. So I kind of have both sides of it, and I feel grateful and fortunate that I had both of those experiences and I've merged them together to do this business thing. But that's the hardest question, I think, Reece, is like, where do people find this education and knowledge to learn how to run a small business? To be honest, I got a bookshelf right over here out of the view with 40 books on it that I just Googled, and I was like, oh, this looks like a good book. And I just Google stuff. Watch videos on YouTube, read articles. Like, there is no excuse to not have the knowledge. The work ethic part of it, the can-do attitude, maybe one thing, but like, there's no excuse not to have the knowledge because everything is out there for us. And honestly, what we do is not overly complicated, and all of that information is available online and in books. You just got to take the time to digest them and put your nose into it.
Totally. Matt,
well, no, I was going to say, so Chris, I think I read a book recently called Traction. Have you read that book?
I have.
Okay. Yeah. Do you follow a similar philosophy in your business?
I don't remember what the book was about because I read before bed and then I fall asleep and I wake up and my wife's like, what'd you learn last night? I'm like, I don't remember.
Well, what you said is like putting numbers down on paper, kind of starting somewhere. A lot of that is, I imagine, is like, you also said where you want to be in a year. So I think like businesses start with like, where do we want to go with this? Right. And getting everybody excited and aligned around where you want to go, and then working backwards from there. So to Reece's point, I was curious kind of how you've taken those numbers you put down on paper and kind of communicated them to like, what were the numbers that you put down on paper, right? Like, is it your goals in 1 year, 2 years, 10 years? Like, talk to us about kind of how you think about the vision for Otter Creek, and then how you've actually communicated that to your team as a starting point.
Yeah. So I actually found some old like loose leaf pieces of paper with my like notes and chicken scratch on them from 5 years ago. And I'm not much of a memento guy, but I've saved them in folders and I have them in my office. And I look back at them sometimes because it is um it's a neat reminder for me to see where we've come and look at the numbers that were going on paper. Like our first year in business, we did like $400,000 in revenue. It was me and my wife,
Mhm.
and we did all the work. She jumped in the field. She's a designer by trade, and she handles our marketing, client facing side of the business, and she runs the design side. But like she would jump in the field, and we did like $400,000, and the next year we did like $800,000, and then like 1.6, and then 2.5, and as of now we're maybe a $4 or $5 million business a year, right?
Yeah.
Depends who's asking, because if Reece is asking, I told him we were a little less, so our subscription cost was less, but
Hey,
um
we'll catch you. We'll square that up. Don't worry.
but really early on, I I think you have to look at it. Most businesses are going to start small, and so look at it like, what's my capacity? Okay, if I'm working in the field, how much work can we handle in 1 month? Well, you got 40 hours in a week, realistically 32 that are billable. Okay, this is my billable rate. This is probably how many projects. I think I could manage 2 projects at a time. I got 2 kitchens going on. I can bounce back and forth. Okay, I'm going to need one guy for that. Just start writing those numbers down and see where they shake out. Start on the smallest scale you can. Start on a 1 day, multiply that by 5. Now you have your week. Multiply that by 4. Now you have your month, and multiply it by 12. I think one of the biggest barriers for us is just what feels too overwhelming, and something that I've always tried to tell myself is like, just break this down into small chunks, make it digestible for myself. How do I break this down into as little of a piece as I can, and then just use numbers to kind of understand that on a bigger scale.
Okay, so when you're talking about putting numbers down on paper, it's a little bit more of like a capacity measurement, right? And then like so starting from where you are today and then building up from there, then it is in 5 years we want to be doing $20 million in revenue and be known as like the premier builder on the seacoast. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think when you're small and you're starting there, it has to be capacity based, because that is going to be your most limiting factor, is how many hours do I have in a day? When we started this business, we didn't have kids. We have a little one now. That changed the game. But like, I consistently, I don't know, I didn't really do the math, but probably 65 to 75 hours a week. And it's like, you don't really want to base things off of that, but that's kind of what you have to do early on to get things going. Um, as we've grown, 6 years ago, I did not know how to run a business that did 5 million a year as we do right now. I did not,
Mhm.
but I didn't need to, because I had 6 years to figure it out. If you want to fast track that and do it in 2 years, more power to you. That's aggressive, but it can totally happen depending on where you came from. I'm on the younger side. I was certainly on the younger side 6 years ago when we started this business. I had a lot of learning to do, and I knew that, and so I wasn't going to try to rush this too fast, um, and run into trouble. And I also see that happen quite a bit. Builders grow a little too fast and they don't know how to control it because they lose track of their numbers. But to go back to what you were saying, Matt, I think it does start with capacity based, and then you should set a goal out in the future of what you want to look like in 5 years, and then try to work backwards and figure out on a year by year basis how you can do that. It
Yeah.
seems daunting, but just put it on paper. Just put it on paper
Right.
and see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and it almost, just real quick, Matt, it almost sounds like, so Matt, looking at it from the standpoint of like, do we want to be the $20 million a year premier builder in this market and then reverse engineer it back in? But it almost sounds like the nature of this business, with capacity being your most limiting factor, is you have to iron out that unit economic before you can really get into that measurement of like, okay, what's attainable? Where do we actually want to go? In that journey from 5 to 6 years ago, what were some of the most impactful learning moments? And let's just say acquired education. I don't know, issues with accountants, issues with attorneys, issues with wins, losses that were the most impactful that maybe the listener could like hear in on and recognize as a cue to like, okay, I might have a situation where I have to invest in an accountant or in an attorney, or I have to have these red flags in place, all with the intention of learning and navigating that
Yeah.
growth path.
So yeah, I had a conversation with one of our plumbers the other day. He's currently an owner operator, one man band. He had an apprentice, but he fired him. So he's back to working for himself. And he was like, help me understand, like, what are my options here? And I kind of laid it out for him, and I gave him 3 options. And I think they're very applicable to this conversation. I was like, you stay small, you stay in the field, and you're going to be really profitable because you got your hands on the work and you're going to do a good job because you do. You grow a little bit and you run a crew of no more than 4 guys so that you can stay in the field enough to keep a good eye on what's going on, but you will have to hand responsibility off. If you stay that small, your overhead and administrative work isn't that much. Like, you can do your billing in the afternoon for an hour, and you can keep up with stuff like that, and you can get quotes done because you don't need to bring in that much work, right? You don't need to send that many bills. I said, after that, you make the decision, take the damn bags off. You hire a couple people to not just be helpers, but be leaders in your company. And you acknowledge the fact that you're now the business owner and you're running the operation, and you are not running the work in the field. And I think that's applicable for builders too. I think we get caught up with the numbers and stuff. And, like, as much as I am here preaching numbers, you got to start with the end in mind. Like, what do you want? If you want to be bags on 3 or 4 days a week, I don't know how you run a 10 or $20 million construction company bags on, like, 3 or 4 days a week. So start with what you want at the other end of it, and then work your way back in. I think for me, it's asking yourself the real question of, do I want to be in the office more than I'm in the field? Because if the answer is no, then you got to recognize that you're probably going to have a limited capacity of the scale of your business, which is totally fine, because I know a lot of guys in this area, at least, that run pretty small, nimble operations, and they do really well.
Totally.
So I think it's really looking at the end goal and what you want, and then parsing it back from there and figuring out how that fits within it.
Well, and I think that's a great answer, because that's bridging the gap even more so to, like, Matt's suggestion of, like, where do we want to go? How do we reverse engineer this in? But taking into consideration the reality of construction, which is there's only so many hours in the day. So much of it is self-performed work. And then having that realization point of, what do I actually want out of this business? And that was a lesson that I learned early on selling software and solutions to builders, was I just assumed that every builder wanted to grow their business, more top line revenue, more projects, more employees, more this, more that. But I think that's a very real part of how do we not struggle with the business side, is being real with what do we want this business to be. And then once you understand where am I actually trying to go? Am I trying to be a $5 million a year guy? Do I want to be the 20, 30, 40, $50 million a year premium builder in my area? Having that benchmark, and then understanding that it really is boiling it down to the unit economics, so then you can comfortably scale and have that anticipation, expectation setting.
Well, yeah. I mean, Chris, I think the key piece you said that'll be relevant to a lot of our listeners is, okay, who am I? What do I want to be? Do I want to build a big business? Okay, then the nature of my day to day is going to change, right? It's going to change from being on the job site, dealing with, like, specific streams of work, right? And it's going to be more in the office, in team meetings, like overseeing people on my team who are overseeing specific streams of work. So the nature of your role shifts, right? You're, like, less hands-on, essentially. I think that what we see in the industry is that's the case for a lot of individuals. They come from a skilled trades background, or got into remodeling or whatever else, and then they shift to running a business. And I think a lot of them will then work with, like, a business coach to put some processes in place.
Yep.
Did you do that as you made the shift, or were you able to just rely on your experience in the field and then translate that into what it means to manage a team? Because at the end of the day, even in the field, you are coordinating work, right? You're not hammering all the nails. You're not installing the wiring yourself. You're coordinating a bunch of people that need to do a job. So I'm sure a lot of it is applicable at the company level. It just might seem less familiar. And so it's a little bit more intimidating. So anyways, I'd be curious to hear how much help you had in making that transition, and what you think were the most relevant pieces of your job before transitioning to kind of business owner day to day.
Yeah. I have had a lot of people that I've leaned on for help, some much more informally than others. One piece of advice that I'd slide in is, don't be afraid to pick up the phone. If you get somebody's number that you look up to in this industry, just call them. if they don't pick up or they don't want to hear from you, then they're kind of a dick anyways. Am I supposed to be swearing on this? I don't know. But like, just call them. Like, I've cold called so many people and just been like, hey, here's who I am. I'm really hungry. I love what you do. I want to pick your brain for 5 minutes. You got 5 minutes? And they're like, I'm driving home. I'm like, great. Sounds like a good time. But sometimes that doesn't work out. But yeah, no way did I figure this all out on my own. I will say I did. I have entertained and I have not hired a business coach. I really love the business side of it. I spend a lot of time educating myself on it, and I do feel like I have a bit of a background in it, with an econ degree and a finance kind of focus. So some of that stuff I've been able to figure out on my own. But we have outside accounting firms. I've got attorneys that I bounce questions off of contracts, and they've reviewed my contracts. And we've got one thing that we don't have that I wish we did in this area was a stronger builder network of guys that we could really bounce stuff around. I listen to a lot of podcasts and I'm on Instagram and stuff. And it seems like the younger generation around the country is much more open to sharing numbers and processes and all this. And I'm kind of stuck with the old guard around here where we are. And they're like, well, you're going to share numbers? You're crazy. Like, why? And I'm like, you still got to figure out how to do it. Like, who cares? Like, if we all charge about the same price, then the client's just going to make a decision on who they align with. So, to answer your question, Matt, I've pulled information, I've pulled inspiration from a lot of different places. But honestly, more than anything, it's been just putting my nose in as many books I can get a hold of. And reading every single article I can find on Fine Home Building or JLC or whatever, and just digging in and pulling out what's useful, and, as they say, discard the rest.
Well, and even for the topic with like a lot of business owners in this space struggling with more of the business side, do you think that it's a fair comment to make, that that's one of the limiting factors? Is more of like that John Wayne, I can do it myself mentality that keeps them from not wanting to reach out and not investing the time to educate and not trying to network and expand and do that? Do you think that's one of the biggest limiting factors that keeps business owners from really excelling and running a healthy business?
100%. If we can get a little more real here, our industry is flooded with egomaniacs. Mm-hmm. And I love our industry. I love what we do. I love working with our hands. I love building a tangible product. But between the subs and the vendors and the owner, there's just too much ego in our industry, and everyone thinks they can do it themselves. And yeah, I think that's the most limiting factor, is people are either maybe afraid to ask for help, don't think they need it, or maybe they're not sure where to start, because there also isn't like a clear place of who do I ask to help me run my business.
Sure. Well, and I think what do you think helped you? I mean, obviously, like, you're formally educated, right? Like, what do you think is probably the biggest trait or skill that you could, if somebody is struggling and they do have that, egocentric, I can do it myself, that John Wayne type mentality, what do you think that mental shift or that paradigm shift is for them to be more confident in seeking help?
Well, a sign we have posted downstairs, and probably the quote I say the most to my team, is check your ego at the door. I would say start by recognizing that you have something to learn, and that is not a knock on you as a person. If anything, that is a positive attribute, that you are self-aware enough to recognize that you want to do something bigger, or not just bigger. We get caught up with bigger, something better with your business. Stay small if you want, but just run it better, and strive for being better and figuring out how to do that. And I think the first step is recognizing it. And then the second step is just reaching out and looking within your network or what you're seeing around you and saying, let me ask a question. I had this guy that wouldn't leave me alone about a software product at JLC. Next thing I know, I'm talking to him for 30 minutes, picking his brain about, but let's be honest, I saw an opportunity that you talk to a lot of other builders. And I said, maybe this guy has a lot of good information here, because he talks to a whole bunch of builders. So let me ask him some stuff, and just picking your brain around numbers. And hey, what are you seeing with this in other markets? We get so hyper-focused on our little bubble that I think sometimes we forget to look outside and realize that there's a whole bunch of other people having the same struggles we're having at the same time.
Totally. Well, and I think that's probably why there is such a why you do have this experience of people saying, I can do it myself. I need to guard my numbers. I need to do this on my own, which limits them from the growth upside, is because in this industry it has been competition over collaboration, which I'm stealing one of Nick Schiffer's comments, right? Collaboration over competition. And really getting yourself into a vulnerable state of like, I have my vision, to Matt's point, right? I know where I want to go as a business. That is the motivator and the driver for me to drop my ego and say, I need to get here. I can't do it on my own. I need to reach out to other people in the space. Even software, like that is, to your point. I mean, when you talk to software reps, at least good software reps, if they're actually intentionally listening to business problems and what's actually happening and how does that work with their solution, even limiting on that and being open to taking a look at demo and taking a look at other business coaching opportunities. I think that's the biggest thing. And it's not demo more software and look at more service, but come from that place of curiosity. And I think that curiosity has to come from having a vision of where we want to go and what is it actually going to take and why am I not able to get there?
Totally. And not to pat you guys on the back too much, but hey, you're starting a podcast and hopefully sharing some really good information. I have learned a ton from the handful of construction podcasts that I listen to in this industry, one of which you just mentioned, Nick Schiffer's podcast, The Modern Craftsman. There's so much to learn from just hearing these conversations with other people and what they're going through and their struggles, and to not be too hungry to eat, right? Like there's times where I'm like, oh, we can't adopt this new software. I don't have time to sit down and do these demos and try to get my team on board with this crap. Like we got projects to build. We got stuff to do. Like I don't have time for this. You also can't afford not to do it at times, right? Like I don't have time to hire a guy. It's like, hold on a second. Let's think about this from the other perspective. If you don't hire this guy, you got to do all this work. So suck it up, take the 8, 16, 24 hours it takes to hire somebody in the process and eat shit for the short term to get somebody in that can do this job. It's just, a story for us. Like our office manager, I was complaining to you about this. Our office manager, she just had a baby, which I'm super thrilled about. She is on a 3-month maternity leave. Not super thrilled about. Like, where's all that work go? And in the midst of it, we had to hire a new project manager, a new carpenter, and an administrative assistant. And I'm just like, oh boy, like what am I doing right now? But on the flip side of it, I can't do all of that work for the next 3 months by myself.
So, well, and I think that's the dynamic. Is like I can't see the forest because all the trees are in the way, right? Like that's the bigger one. Is how do I manage what we're doing now? How do I prioritize our time to get it done? But it's having almost these experiences motivate you, right? Like you have AJ go out on maternity leave, like obviously like you're going to support her. You want her to have time with her new baby. But the reality of it is you as the business owner, that falls on your plate and you have to make those decisions. So what do you think is that mental shift for builders? Do they have to go through these experiences and it's oh shit, now we have to deal with it? Or do you think there's something that they could start thinking about a little bit more clearly to mitigate that risk in those situations more so?
The mental shift. So the biggest thing for me, the single biggest decision that I've made is taking the bags off. I've removed myself from the field. I have relinquished the title of carpenter. And the coolest thing is I now have guys that I've hired in the past 5 years that came in as not better carpenters than me that are now far superior to my skill set than it ever was. Right now, it's not very good. I'm a general laborer when I'm on site. But that is the single most important thing that I did was take the bags off to focus on the business side of it. Because if you can't give yourself an empty room, I tell my team when the door's shut, it's shut for a reason. Leave me alone. Shoot me an email. Don't just come banging on my door. To give yourself an hour to like just think and just kind of look at where you're at. I think, as you said, we get so caught up in just producing work on a daily basis, we completely lose sight of what we're doing it for. And a little story I've been telling myself in my head is I started off on job sites when I was a 10-year-old kid sweeping and stacking piles of wood only to realize they were all getting thrown in the dumpster. But I didn't really do anything. I swept and I just moved around and I shuffled things around. And I made the job site look pretty. And my dad was like, good job, Junior. Let's go get ice cream. And fast forward, I took on more responsibility with his company and started running, some of the work and whatever, and had more responsibility and more headaches, and had to go to the lumberyard after work to pick up material the next day for the guys. And now all of a sudden I start my own business and I'm in the field and I'm doing the office work and all this. And oh man, we're going to take this to the moon and we're going to be a multi-million-dollar company and blah, 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 blah. I've only been in this field for like 10 years. And I'm already like, man, the dream is to be back where I was when I was 10 years old, hanging out with my pals on the job site, just sweeping with a broom, no responsibility, like hanging out, having a good time, radio's going, guys are in a good mood, the sun's out. Like, that's the dream. And I've heard other guys say it, like the dream is to be Tommy Silva and decide every day when you wake up, like, am I going to put the pouch on? Am I going to just talk to the camera? Like, what am I going to do today? And I think we just lose sight of that in this big middle that is 10, 20, 30 years of a career, 40 years of a career. We lose sight of it because we're just go, 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 go.
Yeah.
I don't want to discount the go, 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 because that's what puts food on the table for my family and for the employees here and every other business. Like, there is no substitute for hard work in this industry. And I recognize that, but I think sometimes we do need to stop a little bit and breathe.
Yeah. Very relevant to us. No. I was going to say that's kind of back to the beginning of the conversation. Like, you can't just have a vision. You can't just have day-to-day operations. You need them both together, right? And they need to kind of constantly map back to each other. So you come up with where you want to go. You make sure everyone's excited. Make sure you have the team in place to go after it, and then you have a process to make sure you're making progress towards that.
I want to ask you guys. You see a lot of businesses. You have a very interesting perspective in that you are looking at the financials of a lot of businesses and you can see this landscape. What's your perspective on how many businesses we have in this industry, the average size of them? And do you think there would be value in what I would call, I guess, conglomeration of like merging businesses or having fewer businesses that are more established with better systems in place? Do you think that we're doing ourselves a disservice by being an industry made up of a bunch of micro businesses, us included?
That's an interesting question. I can just pull up the data. So we have this data in terms of we can talk about how many general contractors there are in the United States. You want to talk about that?
Yeah.
There are 893,000 general contracting firms in the U.S. according to the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Okay.
Of those 893,000, 630,000 of them are sole proprietorships. So like one man shops. All right. So that's basically the bulk of it. There's a huge portion that are one man shops. Now, those are pretty small businesses. On average, they're doing like 130K in revenue. Okay. So those, you could consider those to be maybe they're registered as a sole prop, but maybe they're doing like a job on the side. So these are small jobs mostly, right? So not necessarily full-time businesses. They might be, but a lot of them I'm sure are kind of as a side project. All right. You then get into the employee organizations where they actually have employment. There are about 500,000 that are 1 to 9 full-time employees, so still pretty small, and on average about 2 million in revenue. Okay. And then it starts to drop off after that. So still a decent amount up to 50 employees. But then once you get into the more than 50 employees, it's like less than 20% of the overall industry. Okay. So yeah, went through the numbers, maybe a little bit too much of the numbers, but your point is correct. It's pretty fragmented, right? And there's a lot of small businesses. In terms of the benefit of consolidating these companies, generally, when you're consolidating, you want to see a lot of like benefits to scale. Okay. And if you think about construction, it's fairly localized, right? It's like fairly localized to an individual market. So you want to think about like benefits to scale. Like our company is a software company, right? We can kind of scale it to eternity, right? So there's like a clear opportunity to scale our product. With a construction project, right? I used to often think about this when I had a painting company. you're doing kind of like the same, you have to like produce the same stream of work over and over. You can't produce one painting job and then just like sell it. You got to repaint the house every single time. So I think overall as an industry, a little bit like less inclined to consolidate just from what is the product that you're scaling across the country, and like who are your relationships outside the market, et cetera. And then the second thing you think about when consolidating is like how much of the core value is specific to your business. So in our business, the company owns the software product. It is the product. It's hard to reproduce that product, right? But a painting job, to your point, right? Other people might know how to create a painting job and do a painting job. So as the organization becomes kind of spread out and you have individual people that are painting houses, they might look up one day and say, huh, I could just start my own business painting this house.
That's what happens, right?
And I could undercut. So a little bit of a long-winded answer where I don't think construction is necessarily like super geared towards consolidation, and that's why you probably see a lot of the fragmentation that exists in the industry.
Yeah. Maybe my word choice wasn't accurate. I love the numbers that you just shared, and I've looked those up once before, but I kind of forgot them. First of all, yes, we all recognize that you guys are much smarter for being in the software industry than the building industry.
No. There's pros and cons. There's pros and cons, right? Like it's not always black and white like that. It's not like, being in software is better than being in construction. Because if you think about it,
I know
the chances that you will be successful in software are much lower because there are only going to be a lower amount of winners at the end of the day, right? Whereas in opening a restaurant, opening a construction business, anything that's more localized, like there's plenty of opportunity out there. It's like in software, more like winner take all. And then in construction, there's like many winners, right?
Yeah.
So it's just different dynamics in the industry. I wouldn't say one's better than the other.
Totally. I think from my perspective, and I was guilty of this because I went out on my own to start a small business when I already worked for someone else's business. But if I'm being honest, the reason I did was for earning potential. My dad didn't necessarily pay a whole lot of attention to how to run the business, and therefore I don't think the margins were there to really support the employees the way that could have been done. I've always said, and Lauren and I talk about a lot, like, how do we create a business that we can actually retain employees here and they can work a whole career here? I think I heard Jeff Sweener from Sweener Builders say that on a podcast. Like when guys come in, they have their Sweener University and they come in and they're young. It's like, how do we show them that they can have an entire career here if they want to? And that they don't have to leave once they start a family or once their life becomes a little more expensive to go make enough to provide for themselves. And that requires, to me, getting out of the field and paying attention to the business side of it and the numbers and trying to really understand what your margins are and what your overhead is so you can figure out how much you can pay and how to support your employees. Maybe this is a hot take. Maybe some people won't like to hear it, but I think of those 880,000 general contractors, 700,000 of them shouldn't be in business for themselves.
Sure.
Maybe not 700,000, Yeah.
Maybe half.
That might be heavy, but I see what you're saying. And I think this all goes back down to vision. And I think even in newer generations and as people enter the market, I think it's great that you share, the openness that you did this for like an earning potential thing. I think a lot of people look at this and say, I could be the CEO of a company. I could start my own business. I could do these things without having the context of what that actually means, right? You can't just assume that you go out and start this business and all the upside's going to be yours and it's going to be easy. And that's the home run dream. I'm going to go out and start a business. And this could be a part of your 700,000 hot take, Chris. But I think the big piece is when you go out, you have to really understand in order to make the money more so than what you are is going to come with a lot of other risk, a lot of other commitment and sacrifice that you hope is going to pay out at the end. And that hope can be mitigated with more strategy, right? Sitting down, putting things on paper and being more calculated and strategic. But I think to the Sweener conversation, right, is there's a lot of value to being an employee, right? You show up, you do your job, you can become exceptional at it. You can build a lifetime of honing it on your craft. And you don't have to come across the conversations of, I have a key employee that has a personal life and is starting a family and is now on maternity leave, and I want to give them that benefit, rightfully so. Now all this work falls on my plate, right? That's where you start to really like weigh this pro and con. It's like, okay, I could go out and start my own business and make a lot more money, but what does that actually look like? That looks like the buck stops at you. You got to pay people, right? If you don't hit payroll, people without rent, that impacts them. What are they going to do? Start looking. Now we have a retention problem, right? Sure. And even less concerning. So I think the big piece here, and this is again, it's massively applicable to this episode, is like, why do builders struggle with the business side? And it could be not having the context and the understanding of what it actually takes to run a healthy business. And if you are going to be taking that jump and you are going to be going into that world, knowing that it takes being detail oriented, it takes knowing your numbers, it takes having a vision, it takes understanding scale and process and logistics and getting people to execute on that work and building a cohesive unit to start accomplishing bigger numbers so that the business actually makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. 100%.
Totally. I think there's a couple things that I thought of right there. One, my wife and I were joking. We felt very proud to be in a position as a business here to be able to offer a maternity leave to our employee that left with pay. And my wife's like, "Did I get a paid maternity leave?" I'm like, hell no. No, like, I mean, like she took time off for sure, but that's just part of what it means to be an owner. In our first year in business, we always joke, our first employee who's still here and has been an incredible contributor to what we've built in the last 6 years. For 2 months straight, he made significantly more than my wife and I did combined early on in the business. We couldn't pay ourselves, and we were still paying him because we knew we had to keep him on in order to do what we wanted to do with this. But we literally didn't pay ourselves for a couple months, and it was dicey. And early on, I took a hard money loan from a guy that I played men's league hockey with that I knew had a bunch of money, and I was like, dude, I'm in a tough spot. Like, can I borrow $20,000 and I'll give it back to you in like 2 months? And I only asked him because my grandmother turned me down. And I was like, I don't like if you don't, like, I totally understand, but I'm just going to ask you because I feel like you probably know where I am. He's an entrepreneur and he had done it. And he's like, yeah, no problem. And I was like, I don't care what the terms are. I'll pay it. Just like, whatever. He's like, we'll figure that out at the end. I was like, that doesn't feel good for me, but whatever. I'm desperate. I'll take it. Comes out at the end. And he's like, oh, what was it? I was like, I had the money for 45 days. He's like, $45. I was like, what? He's like, the interest. I was like,
that's a good friend.
You're a good man. And he wasn't he was a guy I knew, much older than me. And he's like, hey, I've been where you've been. I appreciate you, like, bringing the money back. And but sometimes it's just what it takes. And to your point, maybe I'm being a little brash by saying 700 out of 880,000. And I think more of it from my perspective is I would like to know how many of those other business owners actually want to be in business for themselves or felt like they had to because they couldn't see a way forward in their current situation working for somebody else.
Yeah, because they wanted to grow. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely an interesting question. I mean, based on that though, then a lot of these sole props are just doing the sole proprietorships. They're just like doing what they always wanted to do, sticking around, keeping the bags on, as you say, out
That's
there.
Right.
For sure.
The ones that are maybe the most confused are in the 1 to 4 employee bucket. They're like, I don't know about this. Might want to go back to the sole prop plan. And I actually had earlier when I quoted those numbers, I actually was looking at employee count when I was talking about the amount of firms that are in the 1 to 9 FTEs. They're actually a lot fewer than that. So the 1 to 9 FTEs are 232,000. I said earlier 500,000. And then the amount of companies that have more than 50 employees is less than 1% of the overall market. So basically everybody has fewer than 50 employees.
It also tells you that's extremely difficult. Go ahead.
Yeah. Is that residential and commercial? Do you think?
Yeah. This only includes heavy and civil, which is a decent chunk, but this is residential, commercial.
Okay, that seems fair. Yeah, we have a few sole props that work for us on a 1099 basis, and kind of jealous of them sometimes. They just like show up, they put a staircase in, they're there for like 10 days, they strike off, they like go take a day or two off and catch up on their like invoicing, and then they go do another one. And it's like,
Yeah.
looks kind of nice. But I also know that those guys love being in the field. They're happiest on the tools, and they're always behind on their billing because they don't want to get back in the office and send the bills. And I kind of had this like pipeline dream that we could create an administrative back office for all of them, and just like they would pay a fee, or we'd take some sort of cut and like manage all of that for them, so they could just run their business the way they want, but we would handle the billing side of it, the administrative side, and the insurances and that kind of stuff, and just let them do them. And then I always circle back to them like, well, might as well just employ them. That's just dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, that is an interesting model. That is certainly one of the benefits of scale, I guess, right? If you employ a model where employees are kind of if you basically outsource the like finding of the business to them, they go out and find their own jobs, and you just manage the back office processes for them. That could be a really interesting model. Because then you remove the issue earlier of what I was talking about, where like, you have an employee painting a house and they're like, hey, I could just do this for myself, start my own business. You're still allowing for a situation where everyone's kind of like running their own business. You're just taking the piece out that they probably hate the most in running the business, which is taking care of all the back office stuff. So they remain independent, and then you're supporting them in the background.
I think that's exactly it. Naturally, conversation from work gets taken to the home when you work with your wife. And I think at least once a week, I tell my wife, I'm like, I hate 50% of my job.
Yeah.
And it's the 50% that I didn't really sign up for. I mean, I did. I signed up for all of it. But like, I never was in high school or college or my first couple job opportunities being like, I want to be a sales guy. No offense, Reece.
That was my dream
wasn't
from day one.
I knew it. I figured. It wasn't something that was ever on my radar. And like, yeah, I can talk to people. I actually think we do a decent job selling jobs because we're kind of a tandem and we work off of each other and do the whole husband wife dynamic thing. But I don't love selling the work. I like being in the operation side of it. And it's just like, yeah, you got to sell work. And as we grow, I said to my wife, I go, are we planning on hiring a salesperson anytime soon? She goes, hell no. Like, that's the most important thing that we do. And I was like, so you're saying I'm only going to end up doing like more sales calls and stuff like that? And she's like, yeah, I see where you're going with this. And I'm like, okay, there we are. Like,
buckle up.
We'll hire another project manager though, so Chris never goes to the job site.
Yeah. No, I love it. I mean, I think this was a great conversation. As we wrap up, I mean, that's the applicable side of this too, though, is going. You're more on the operations side of it, right? Those efficiencies. How are we actually executing the work? How are we keeping the wheels on the bus? That's interesting to you. I think the biggest thing is why do builders struggle with the business side of building? Is having that self-awareness. I mean, that's my takeaway, right? Having the self-awareness of where you actually want to be spending your time, and then being real with yourself. If you want to be a business owner and you're exceptional at building a home and craftsmanship and carpentry, then you should go like down a custom route, right? Something very niche, very, very detail oriented, something like that. And then you should be real about what is the scalability of that, right? If you want to be more of like an operational guy, right? And you really get into the numbers and you love seeing what does healthy business make, go the production route, right? How can we limit all the variability that comes in the building process, get it into a recipe that we can just crank out volume and we can hit scale a lot more comfortably. So I thought this was a great episode. Definitely appreciate you hopping on here, Chris. Any other final comments?
No, I appreciate you guys having me on. I do think I'd wanna say, think about what you want out of it, and think about not necessarily, oh, I want to be a $10 million business. Like, what does that mean? What does that look like for you? What is that work-life balance? Like, think about what you want out of it. What do you want your days to look like? What do you want your life to look like in 5 or 10 years? And then try to parse it back from there. And if you feel like you're completely stuck, ask for help, because there's a lot of people out there that are waiting for your phone call that want to help you. And I would just lean on people and be completely shameless about it.
Yeah. Have your vision, find your unit economic, right? How do we grow? What does this unit cost actually look like to get it done? Lean on other people and don't be the hero.
And let's be honest, if you really hate something in your business, hire someone else to do it.
Mm-hmm.
You just got to make sure that can work, but hire someone else to do it. If you really don't want to be in the numbers every day, hire a controller, hire a CFO, hire somebody to come in and run that office for you. Just make sure that you've at least paid attention enough to the numbers that you can afford it.
Yeah. Totally.
Or just make sure you've created something that they can't just take away, spin off and start their own business, Exactly. I'm just ending on a more
yeah. Are we talking moats now? What are the little Warren Buffett land over here? What's the moat of your business, dude?
All right, great. You learned how we do all of this. Now you're going to go take it down the street.
Yeah, exactly. I'm kidding. Cool. All right, yeah. Thanks for coming on, Chris. It was great meeting you.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for having me. It's been great.
Of course. All right, see you, dude.